Karen indicated she's having some technical difficulty.
Well, yeah, she said she was going to attend, that she thought she'd resolved it. And here she comes.
Okay. I don't see her yet. Are you there, Karen?
She's just connecting to audio. I'm not sure you will see her, Val. I'm not sure. Karen,
Okay.
Are you gonna have a camera today?
Well, I'm on the iPad. How do I get the camera to work?
It's magic.
I know there's something.
Should be a Zoom on your Zoom control start video.
There it is. Do you see me now?
Yeah,
I do.
Good.
well, then I guess we can call this meeting to order. The minutes are being kept by a video recording. We'll do a roll call vote. This is Val Humble. I'm present. Eric?
This is Eric Molander. I am present.
Mary Helen?
This is Mary Helen, and I am on the camera. I don't know if present is a good term.
And Karen?
Did you say my name?
Yes, I did. So you
Okay,
acknowledge
sorry.
you're here?
I was laughing at Mary Helen. Yes, I'm here.
Okay, doke. First order of business is, as I announced at the last month's meeting, because of health concerns, I'm needing to reorganize my my priorities, and I want to step down as president of the board effective as soon as we've elected another president. I am willing to stay on the board until we have a candidate to replace me. I don't want to put the board in a position of lacking a quorum to have meetings, but do be giving thought to who you might like to have on the board to replace me. Is there anything anyone would like to say before we open for nominations?
I feel compelled to say thank you, Val, for all your help and leadership and time and energy and kindness that you put into this organization. Thank you very much.
You're certainly welcome.
And I just want to add that I think Val has spent more time helping Penn 2 residents in years than all of us combined. I moved here in 2004 and he'd already been a fixture. And he has known more, informed more, and given more to the residents than, I'm going to say this again, all of us combined. So for that, he is phenomenal in the field that he served. And I truly identify with your take care of you first, because you're the most important person.
Thank you. I appreciate your comments, although I would say I think you contributed more to the neighborhood than I have. But let's proceed on and get the business done here. Nominations are open for president of the board and 2 supervisors.
I'd like to nominate Eric Molander.
I'll second that.
Are there any further nominations? Perhaps we don't need a roll call vote then. All in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Hey,
Any opposed? I guess, Eric, you are now the new president of our board and you can take over conducting the meeting.
Well, thank you. And let me just echo the comments that everyone else has made. Val, you are an inspiration. You truly are for all of us in terms of what it means to be civic minded and to have the best interests of our neighbors at heart, even over and above whatever our own interests may be. So in stepping into this role, I have a great role model, and I will endeavor to do my very best to live up to what you've done for us. So with that, we have a revised agenda. And as we jump into this, I just wanted to check in with my fellow board members. Are there elements of our agenda that are more important, less important? I know that we're going to be pressed for time. Okay, so with that in mind, let's move first to that first agenda item. Go ahead, McKenna, I think you're up.
All right, thanks, Eric. Good afternoon, everyone. I'll try to get through this relatively quick. I know you have a packed meeting, so I'm going to share my screen. So I have some big updates today regarding the 13th Avenue Pump Station Discharge Lines project. There were, as you mentioned, originally 2 items on the agenda for this project, but we no longer need the supply purchase. So this will be informational only, and I'll get to the reason for that change in a bit. So for a quick refresher on this project, the discharge lines at the Northeast 13th Avenue Pump Station are no longer structurally supported by the levee slope, which has been eroding into the slough. Back in 2020, when we started this project, we discovered a pretty large scour hole up to 12 feet deep beneath these outfalls that caused us to significantly expand the scope, as we now needed to address the source of that scour. We've been working towards a solution in the last few years, and we finally completed final design as of February of this year. We were aiming to go to construction this summer, but we unfortunately are dealing with some permitting delays as well as long material lead times, which is forcing us to move construction to next summer, given the tight 3-month in-water work window that we have. And this is why we no longer need the supply purchase approval today. The contractor will be able to be responsible for all of the materials now. We will likely still plan to issue the advertisement for a contractor in the next few months to give plenty of lead time for materials for next year. And you will see that contract approval for that one is ready. Second big update is that we applied for a pretty large grant through Business Oregon's Special Public Works Fund. This is the same pot of funds that we received for the pre-engineering and design phase of the PMLS projects. And as of 2 weeks ago, Penn 2 has been awarded $720,000 in grant funds for this project, which is very exciting. This will help us fund a very significant portion of construction.
And McKenna, just to make sure, I've had a few questions from other boards and staff. This is in addition to the PED cost investment grant. So it's a separate grant, additional dollars. It's not coming out of the previous award, just to clarify that for everyone.
Correct. Yeah. So thanks for that question. Each district is allowed to biannually request up to $2 million in funds. So we went for the largest amount that Penn 2 had left in that period. So this is in addition to the PMLS funds that were awarded. So, and then as for a budget update, we have seen some increases since I last showed you a forecast, which I think was at 30% design last year. And I want to note that these numbers will look different than what's in your packet because of the construction delay, which was confirmed only in the past week. So there are several reasons listed for the increased costs, the main ones being the increased construction cost estimate over the last year as we progressed design. And we added contingency for construction, and we needed some additional construction services from our consultant. This table on the right shows what was in the current CIP and then what's forecasted to be needed over the next now 2 fiscal years. The final construction cost estimate that we have is sitting at about $900,000. So that's what a good chunk of those funds are going towards, and that'll have to be split between the 2 fiscal years. The good news is that the grant will cover a very large chunk of that gap between our previous estimates and the new estimates. And then lastly, just for an updated schedule, this is showing construction being moved to next year. We should be able to wrap up permitting in the next month or 2, and then begin our formal procurement sometime maybe late summer for a contractor. And then we'll be able to start that process and order materials to give plenty of time for custom items that we need. And then construction would be happening during the in-water work window next summer of June 15th to September 15th. And that is what I have for today. Any questions?
So board members, any questions of McKenna on this project? So I guess I'm going to begin with a couple.
I do have a question, Eric. In the previous materials, there was a discussion about a cost of about 150,000 for the diverter structure at the end. And I'm wondering, is that pure construction of that, or does that include the design and all of the the calculations and everything necessary?
Yeah, so that was just the item that we removed because we were going to have to order it ourselves instead of the contractor because it had a really long lead time. But now that construction is moved, we don't need to do that on our own, but it is just for the actual HDPE part and then all of the bolts to hold it together.
So it costs $150,000 for some rust-proof metal of a certain strength for 2 such diverters. I'm astonished.
Yeah, I know. It's hefty. Yeah.
Okay. And so who is the legal authority that grants the permit for us to do the in-water work?
It is, I think DSL potentially. I'll have to double check on that.
Pong,
Yeah.
do you want to
So,
chime in?
yeah.
Yeah, it's the core regulatory program. As not
So
the
it's
core.
U.S. Army,
Yeah.
right? So it's
so
USACE.
yeah, and they
and
have
they-
two branches. So it's on the regulatory side and then their DSL. And also the Oregon DEQ with respect to potential water quality certification, which we're trying to go.
Just for clarification, DSL is the state of Oregon Department of State Lands. So it's a state of Oregon entity.
And then just to make it more fun, the Corps of Engineers has to consult with the National Marine Fisheries Service if there's
Right.
any potential impacts
Right.
to endangered species. And the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife is involved with both DEQ, the Oregon DEQ, and the Oregon Department of State Lands. Department of State Lands is involved because they own all the waters and river bottoms and
Right.
use those to generate funds for the Common School Fund.
Right. So as we look at this, we've got USACE, the Department of State Lands, DEQ, Oregon DEQ, and the National Fish and Wildlife. Am I
think you said-
missing anything?
You might have said DSL twice, but yeah, that's broadly
No,
speaking.
no, I'm assuming that the Corps of Engineers would have to at least give their blessing to the design,
Yep.
correct?
Mhm.
Okay, but
Maybe not
Right,
the
and
design, but the impacts to the water, right? That's what, this is a regulatory program, not necessarily the rest. So they're just looking at, under the Clean Water Act, the Corps is required to do this permitting activity.
got it. So 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 regulatory bodies.
We've got City of
Thank
Portland
you.
as well.
City
City
of
of Portland's involved with the construction permits and stuff as well.
All right.
When you say City of Portland, you mean BDS?
Mhm.
Okay. I sit on their permit review committee, so if I can be of any help in advocating for a speedy, I did that once before with, they were gonna have multiple stairs for safety reasons, and they were gonna charge $10,000 per permit, but 8 of the 10 permits were identical, so we got those all waived and the fee reduced, so may still have a little bit of leeway because it's the same director and same inspector, and so if you run
Good to
into
know.
a snag and they're taking a long time, I might be able to advocate and help you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Mary Ellen. So McKenna, just sort of final question. For the entire project, what is our budget for this?
So for, let me pull up that slide again. So for the remaining, including this year, and the following years, it's, I think, a little over 1.5 million total, with that $720,000 grant, covering a good portion of the actual contractor construction budget.
700,1315. Okay. So what it basically says is that for the current year, we expect to spend something on the order of magnitude of $360,000 towards this project. 250, yeah, 615 minus the 254.
So this is, yeah, this was what was in our budget. So we're gonna come in about 120,000 below what the current budget was, so we can carry that over into next year's budget.
Okay.
And then I know Lori will have the presentation later, although since I mentioned this has all been changing in the past week, it might take another iteration to get that all in your full budget documentation.
Yeah, and I think that since this is one of the single largest capital expenditure items that we have within the district, it will make our budget look pretty different for this year, because we're going to miss the in-water construction that we had planned for in the budget that was initially submitted. So thank you for that. And just sort of for you and Bill and possibly even Hong and Jim, what are the lessons learned that we have coming out of this process? You know, Val was good enough to let me know that it started off as sort of a couple of $100,000 and it ballooned. What do you think that we should take away from this, particularly as we start to think about the rest of our CIP presentation coming up?
If you don't mind, McKenna, let me start and you can fill in gaps. I appreciate that instinct, Eric, the same as mine for any capital project. And so part of our process internally is to go through an exercise at the end of the project as part of the project manager's final project report. And a large portion of that deals with lessons learned, comments about their ability to match the initial success factors that are listed in the original charter of the project. And so we'll have an opportunity to examine that in full detail when the project's finished. You know, initially here, I think this is just an artifact of, and some other board members have heard me say this, it's an artifact of what happens when you finish a planning effort, where you've undergone through some analyses initially, and based on the data you have at the time, you make some assumptions about costs and so forth. You add a pretty healthy contingency on there, knowing that it's not, you don't have all the information. And then once you put boots on the ground and actually start looking into the project site, you realize, yeah, the scope is really close, or no, the scope is significantly different. And we need to have a conversation with the decision makers about how we want to move forward. And so it's partly that, because we didn't realize about this hole, if you will, in the bottom of the Columbia Slough until afterwards. So part of this is you'll hear this, hear me say the same thing again later in this meeting, is I'm going to be encouraging the district and as well as other special districts we manage to invest into the pre-design effort first. Right. And that's the first stage of design. And once that's over, we have a better handle on what the rest of the cost, what the cost estimate is for construction. and to complete design. And so we went through that, McKenna went through that effort and found out after 30% design that we had a big difference in scope. And so I'm encouraging this board and others to make a similar investment. It's about $100,000, plus or minus depending on the size of the project, but it's money well worth it. Another example of that is what SDIC did not too long ago to go through a pre-design for their gravity outfalls next to their pump station. And we found out that the cost to rehab those pipes was so large that the return on investment just wasn't there. And there needed to be another driver to make those repairs. And so we basically shelved that project after 30% and moved forward. So those are some initial thoughts about lessons learned. But as I said, our process internally is to go through that in fair detail, and we can circle back with you and the rest of the board. Unfortunately, it'll be a year and a couple of months from now.
Well, and I think that what you've done is really admirable because it gives us a heads up. I mean, these are things that will go into the final report. They're already pretty well established, and they can help guide us as part of the next major item, which is on our agenda. McKenna, are you looking for any specific approval from the board today?
Not
Nope.
today.
Okay.
No, just
All
wanted to
right.
give-
Thank you.
Thank
Got it. So Wendy, the next agenda item is?
We're moving to an update on the assessment refund, and Angel will be presenting that.
Okay.
Good afternoon, board. My name is Angel Almendares. I'm the Assistant Finance Manager, and I'm going to be discussing the materials and presentation attached to your board packet regarding the assessment refunds and some of the addendums that are in there. So let me go ahead and set up my screen to make sure that you can see the presentation. One second here. And I hope you are able to see it there now.
I'm getting some background noise. I'm just going to mute folks.
Okay. Perfect. So I want to make sure that the board is aware that there is no action requested at this moment. This is an informational briefing of the upcoming refunds that we're going to be doing in the next month. This process was approved back in November of 2022 after your executive session. So refunds. We came to the board, explained that there were some calculation errors. And let me make sure that I can flip to the next page here. Just as a refresher, assessments are calculated based on a variety of cost drivers: stormwater management, river flow control, average and peak, and indirect. For PEN 2, the cost allocation of the cost allocation is done by considering the flood control and stormwater average allocated per acre, and also stormwater peak allocated for impervious area and the gravel surface. The variance in the assessment percentage is shown in your screen right now. And this was, again, you can see the difference between the assessed and the corrected values. So what's next? We received the refunds and under-assessments calculated using the data from the Multnomah County. We determined there were 128 landowners that were overassessed, 120 landowners were underassessed. The underassessment totals $24,084.85, and the refunds amount to $100,147.47, with the highest single refund to be $19,667.37. The lowest refund going out is $21.44. In your package, you will see that you have a list of all the different recipients of those refunds and their amount. So what are the next steps for us? We're going to be processing the refunds cumulative anything over 20, again, as provided in your list, in your packet. And so it will cover any and all costs of the refund processing costs as previously authorized. We hope to process the refunds and owners for the grand total of $100,947.47 by the May 31st, 2023. And MCD will reimburse Penn 2 for a total of $24,084.85. And I'm going to unshare my screen unless there is a question at the moment, but I want to talk a little bit more of what's in your packet. So I guess you guys can see my face in there. Let me just unshare. And in your packet, in addition to the presentation, you will have a list of the refund list and also a sample communication designed by our communications department that will be has some information for landowners, as well as sample letter that will be sent to the property owners when the refunds are issued. So at this time, I can take any questions or any comments. Please let me know.
During the pause, I will say that we've taken some steps to try and ensure that in the future, we do an extra QA/QC step here. And I want to express my regret for the error and be personally accountable to the board for the results of what happened last year. So appreciate your support for getting these payments, and to the staff for doing the extra work to remedy the mistake.
So the cost drivers, I think, that we have in this, the 60.22, et cetera, right? Those are now unique to Penn 2. And there was a previous discussion that we had that, let me see if I can bring it up. Yeah, that really talked about Penn MCDD having a factor of 30, let's see, 36.18, 27.47, et cetera, coming to their total. And it appears that these are very similar to what the stormwater average was. So
you're asking what
this
difference between the two
is
districts?
really very different from the way that or is it the same way that we're going to bill BES for their portion of stormwater control?
Okay, let me make sure that I comprehend. Yeah, there is, each of the districts have a different methodology for allocating the percentage across the cross drivers.
Right.
Penn 2 is unique to Penn 1 and MCDD and Sandy. They're all different.
And why is that?
Because they are based on their budget and budget expenses and how those line items in the budget are going to be idolized in the district. So the process, we're working on that right now, actually, for next fiscal year. We look at the different expenses in the line item by line item and and we allocate the cost by percentage to come up with the figures to come up with those percentages. And yes, and you're correct in your mention, these percentages generate, or the value, the BES stormwater fee, and then we use the same percentage to allocate the assessment through the entire district. So it's relative. So I don't know if I answered your question, but percentages are different and it's related to the stormwater fee for BES.
Right, and so, but at the same time that we look at BES's obligation to Penn 2, that was correctly billed to BES, correct?
Yes, that is correct. Yeah.
All right.
We were able to remediate that. That was correct. Yeah. We did not overcharge them or undercharge them.
Okay. Got it. All right. At some point, if other board members see an interest in this, I can share that memo that Lori sent on to me some time back, so that we have that as part of your file as well, so that you know how the money flows and why it flows. Any comments on the neighbor communication that we have, this initial letter that we would have? So it looks like this is something that we can support. Jim, is And when we do go out with this letter to people, giving them the refund, let's make certain that we're on the same track in discussing it with them and how we've remedied it. Okay, does that make sense? So we're really looking for you to give us some direction on the messaging to our members there.
We'll do.
Mary Helen?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I have just a comment. Sorry, I had to go do something else for a second. Anyway, it would be very, very helpful to have the information ahead of time of when
Is Mary Helen on mute?
No,
I can't hear her.
I'm hearing her.
Eric,
That's
everyone
strange.
else can hear her right now, so.
can you hear me now? Okay, everybody's nodding except you, Eric, so.
Mary Helen, if you could be a little bit more specific
Well,
about what information
just
you'd
so
like,
that
I'd be happy to
you-
provide it. Thank you.
That we have a heads up when it's gonna go out, because the minute somebody I'm not gonna say the minute, but there are several people
close.
that watch things closely and will stop by my house and say, why did I get this? And I want to be able to say, because.
Excellent point.
And
Thank
Mary
you,
Helen,
Mary Helen.
that's why we're here today, is
Okay.
one, to give you the list, which you've got in your packet, so you know who's receiving a refund and how much they're receiving. Two, you've got a letter, a copy of the letter that's going to
Okay.
go out to each individual that gets a refund. And three, you have a fact sheet that will allow you to have something to look to answer their questions. So that
Okay.
fact sheet is brief. It gives you bullet points as to what happened and what we're doing to remedy. And then you have the list so you know how much each person is getting and who it is that's getting it.
I understand.
And we
all
can
that.
certainly send a quick email to the board members when we have the checks ready to go. We
Back-
actually have been implementing some additional banking protections, because when you send out a lot of public payments, you need to make sure that you have some fraud controls in place. And so we have been going through that implementation prior to this distribution of all of these checks.
We
I
commit to
understand
giving you
having all the- sorry.
several days advance notice before that hits the post office,
Yeah.
and that's a very reasonable
Yeah,
request.
because when the landowner meeting notices went out, neither Val and I ever got any, and I never knew they went out. And so I had several questions about what's this, and it looked different than any other landowner notice. So that's why I'm asking is,
I'll tell you
just so
what,
that-
I will call you directly and make sure I connect with you. And I
okay,
appreciate you asking for that. It's a very reasonable request, Mary Helen.
thanks.
Were you
Thank you.
able to find the fact sheet in your packet so that you have?
I'm trying right now. I'm having
Yes,
printer
that's it.
issues.
Eric,
Yeah.
that's correct, yeah.
We can send it separately if that would be of assistance to you. Let us know if you can't find it, and we'll pull it out separate from the full packet.
It came out in the full packet, so I'll try and find Wendy's
Yeah,
email
it
where
did.
that is. So,
Okay. If you have any trouble, let us know and we'll
It's on
hook you up.
page 52 of the packet. And I'll send it out again as a separate document after this meeting.
okay, thank you.
Wendy?
Sorry for the trouble. It's just,
No trouble, Mary Helen.
Trying
It's
to
a
keep
reasonable
track.
request.
Okay, any other questions from the board?
Can you hear us now, Eric?
I'm sorry?
Can you hear us now?
I can. It's just, Zoom interacts with my Mac in strange and mysterious ways, and I have to always switch back from having Bluetooth to using the internal whenever that happens. So if I switch to look at a spreadsheet during a Zoom meeting, sometimes it just sort of fouls up. Okay, but problem solved. And Wendy, our next agenda item is?
Go ahead, Aster.
let's see.
Hi, my name's Aster Moulton, and I'm the Public Affairs and Community Relations Specialist with the Drainage Districts. And I'm here to give you an update on our Flood Safe Columbia River initiative. Eric and Mary Helen, you've already heard a lot about this initiative, so this will be a refresher for you. And Val, I know you were at our webinar yesterday, so thanks for being there. This will give you some more context, background information. And Karen, this might be new information for you. So Thank you. Yeah. So Flood Safe Columbia River is meant to raise broad regional awareness about the importance of our flood safety system and the fact that we even have one along the Columbia River, and to share in a simple and compelling way our need to improve this infrastructure and prepare for the future. We've worked, MCDD staff has worked closely with communication consultants to refine this initiative, as well as develop the key messages that will help this topic resonate with the broader public. Next slide. So our presentation outline, I will talk a little bit about some of the background data that supports this initiative and walk you through how we landed, how we got here. I'll go through our key messages and the supporting data that help to shape those messages, and how this initiative will help us educate the broader public about the GEO bond and help us develop and refine a bond package to refer. Next slide. I want to note the public opinion research that went into shaping this initiative. Last summer in June, we did some polling for urban Multnomah County voters within the new district boundary. We had a pretty good sample size of 660, and we intentionally had an oversample of voters of color. And that kind of gave us some of our baseline key messages, which we then refined in focus groups this past fall. We had 4 focus groups of registered voters in urban Multnomah County. One group was of voters that live on the west side of the Willamette River. One group was from voters who live on the east side of the Willamette River. And we had a group of lower income voters and a group of property owners. Next slide. So this is our initiative logo and the tagline. Flood Safe Columbia River was loosely adapted from Levee Ready Columbia. We replaced Levee Ready with Flood Safe because a lot of people don't know what levees are, and that's just a little bit more descriptive of our goals of the work. And we added the word river to be a little bit more geographically specific, that we're talking specifically about the river. And we tested a bunch of different logo options in our focus groups, and this is the logo that resonated with the most people. People really liked the raindrop shape and the reference to rain events. People liked the Mount Hood in the background. It's a really recognizable icon in our region. And people liked the reference to the airport and the natural areas as well. And this tagline, protecting communities and improving the natural environment and a changing climate, was specifically chosen to help connect to people's values and motivations in the region, which I will talk more about as I go through the presentation. Next slide. Flood Safe Columbia River is meant to be an umbrella initiative that represents a lot of the simultaneous and interrelated work going on to improve our safety system. It includes the work of the Army Corps of Engineers, that PMLS project, the ongoing work of the drainage districts, the work to stand up the Urban Flood Safety and Water Quality District, and the work of Levee Ready Columbia. And the purpose is to brand this work in a collective way rather than any particular agency, in order to simplify the message for someone who maybe has never heard of this flood protection infrastructure. I think when we start talking about the existing drainage districts and the new district and Levee Ready Columbia, the message can get lost. Next slide. So some of our key findings from the poll is that there's very low awareness of the flood protection infrastructure along the Columbia River. And among the human-made and natural disasters that could potentially affect our region, flooding is the least concerning for people. And I think that is a nod to the great work that the drainage districts have been doing. There haven't been any major flood events in recent history. So I think people don't think about flooding in the region as much as they think about, say, earthquakes. You'll notice here that climate change driven extreme weather events are the top of what people are concerned about. And we know that there's an inextricable link between increased risk of flooding and climate change. So we want to help make that connection for people by leading with climate change and helping people understand there's a connection between that and increased flooding risk. Next slide. So our key messages, you'll notice as I go through them that they're less focused on the economic benefits of the managed floodplain than, say, Levee Ready Columbia. And that's largely due to the fact that we're just reflecting on what we heard from our polling. People found other aspects like environmental protection, impacts to low-income workers and vulnerable communities a little more compelling than that economic impact messaging. That's not to say that we wouldn't mention that when in specific conversations with the business community, but just wanted to acknowledge that. So top line key messages. Major floods are increasing with climate change, and the Portland region is at risk. Flooding could be devastating to vulnerable communities, water quality, and the environment. And fortunately, there is a straightforward solution. And all of these messages have sub-messages, which I will get into in the following slides. Next slide. So first message, major floods are increasing with climate change, and the Portland region is at risk. It's happened here before and will happen again. This is in reference to the Columbia River flood of 1948 that destroyed the city of Vanport. And in the focus groups, people found images of Vanport to be really compelling, but they also thought of Vanport as happening a long time ago. It did happen a long time ago. The photos are in black and white, but this message here helps bring that risk to the present time. Second, the Columbia River is one of the world's largest, most powerful rivers. In the focus group, people were really oriented towards the Willamette River and flooding along the Willamette River. Even when we showed them a map of the levee system along the Columbia River, people still wanted to talk about flooding along the Willamette. So we want to highlight in our messaging how big and powerful the Columbia River is, and how it's such an intense force that our flood protection system needs to protect against. And third, we no longer meet federal standards for flood protection. This is really motivating for people in the focus groups because people tend to think of federal standards as the bare minimum. Next slide. So flooding could be devastating to vulnerable communities, water quality, and the environment. Once again, these were the things that people found most concerning about a major flood event. A system of flood control infrastructure hidden in plain sight protects our region from major disasters. People liked the term hidden in plain sight because a lot of people bike or drive along Marine Drive, or maybe they've visited Broughton Beach and don't recognize that there's a flood protection system there. A lot of people don't know what a levee looks like. So that kind of acknowledges and validates the fact that it's, this flood protection system has been here a long time, even though people maybe don't recognize it for the great work it's doing. It's nearly 100 years old and requires urgent upgrades. The key action word here is upgrade. We tested a lot of different action words in our focus groups like repair, modernize, improve, and upgrade. And repair seems like we're not quite doing enough. The word modernize sounds a little expensive and maybe superficial. But the words upgrade and improve kind of hit those sweet spots. So when we talk about what we're doing to our infrastructure, we want to say we're upgrading or improving our infrastructure. And then third here is toxins, raw sewage, and other hazardous materials could pollute rivers, streams, and drinking water. And this is connecting to people's concern about environmental impacts of a potential flood event. So we want to acknowledge that here. And then finally, 8,000 residents, 60,000 workers, and 75% of the region's businesses would feel the impacts. In the focus groups, a lot of people didn't know that there are residential communities along the Columbia River. So we want to highlight that here. And we also want to highlight the fact that a major flood in this area would have regional impacts. It would affect a huge body of workers. A lot of people would be temporarily or permanently out of a job, and that there would be ripple effects throughout the region. Next slide. So fortunately, there's a straightforward solution. This was really compelling during focus groups because when we mentioned we want to upgrade our infrastructure, people's reactions was like, oh no, not another huge tax. It's going to be another, drawn out, infrastructure project like the Columbia River crossing. But when we told people that the reason our expenses are relatively low compared to other infrastructure projects is because the solutions are fairly straightforward and there aren't a ton of alternatives. A lot of times it just includes upgrading our equipment and raising and fortifying levee systems. People thought that was really compelling. And so we want to talk a little bit about, what we're actually doing. We're raising vulnerable sections of the flood protection walls and upgrading aging equipment. We're working right now on refining that language a little bit and getting a little bit more specific. Simple, cost-effective engineering solutions will protect lives, homes, environmental quality, and save millions of dollars in disaster recovery. This aspect of prevention was really motivating for people. Nature-based solutions can reduce the risk of major floods. People like the sound of nature-based solutions, even if they don't quite understand everything that entails. And the federal government has authorized almost $100 million for the needed improvements. The matching element was also really motivating for folks. Next slide. So Flood Safe Columbia River is the initiative that will bring out to the broader public to start educating them about this system and start collecting feedback about bond scenarios. We're currently working with the new district board in familiarizing the board with our different scenarios. And our goal is to go out to the public this summer to help collect feedback on relative public support for the different scenarios in order to help the new district board with their decision making. And that bond measure, once it's refined, will be referred to a 2024 election. And I want to note that after the measure is referred, there are certain limitations that government staff and representatives have when talking about the measure. We won't be able to campaign directly and say vote yes or no on this, especially as staff during working hours. But we can educate people and provide factual information. And those messages will have to be approved by the Secretary of State. And we'll have a training for everyone when that time comes.
Esther, would you describe for the Penn 2 board some of our thinking about additional research and the timing of that?
Yeah, that's a good question. So for a May 2024 timeline, we would bring community engagement results, some initial results to the board sometime in August. And then after that, we would want to do another round of polling to further refine our bond package, as well as hone in on specific ballot title language. Yeah, so we're going to do another phase of polling and maybe some additional focus groups sometime this fall. And so the good news is that there's some pretty good initial support at 66%. I've heard from our political consultants that we want to be at least 60. So we're in a pretty good position right now. Next slide. After people hear some of our positive messages, total support shifts from 66% to 72%. And you'll see that the somewhat support category, so folks, some people in that initial somewhat support category switch. The strong support moves from 23% to 40%. So that's a really good base of support. And it also, highlights how important messaging is when we talk about this initiative. Next slide. So a couple final thoughts on message discipline. It's better when coming from trusted messengers. We showed focus group participants a video of Ed Washington talking about the issue, a video of Bob Salinger, an environmental advocate, talking about the issue. And they both found those messengers really compelling. They also find flood safety engineers really reliable sources as well. But they're more skeptical of general government staff and elected officials. We also want to avoid conflicting narratives. We want to try to stick to this script for a general audience as much as possible. And to the best we can, avoid talking about, the 4 different drainage districts and the urban flood safety water quality district, because that can distract from kind of the high level key points of what we're trying to do. And we want to shape the narrative, don't let it shape you. And what we mean by this is we really want to be leaders, and we want to be confident in how this initiative gets presented to the public, rather than responding to other messages coming from other public opinion groups or the media. The more we can be grounded in these messages, the better. And that's all I had for you. Our website is up at floodsafecolumbiariver.org. I recommend visiting it if you haven't already, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have. Val?
I'd just like to say I really like the Flood Safe Columbia logo. We've talked for some time about the Urban Flood Safety Water Quality District name needing to have a nickname. And it seems to me that we're hearing urban board, we're hearing all kinds of things. It's not my call, but I would like to hear the Flood Safety District become the new, I don't know, nickname for the board. Emphasize that so that people, when they hear it, they're always hearing flood safety, and they're going to be supporting the flood safety improvement. Parenthetically, I'd also like to comment how well I thought Aster performed yesterday as a moderator on that program. That was really well done, even overcoming some technical difficulties. Thank you.
Thanks, Val.
Other questions or comments from the board feedback?
Hi, this is Kathy. Can you hear me okay?
We can.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Hi. This was great to see. I had checked out the website when you sent it around, and it's very nice, really concise, clean communications. I just had a question as to whether you've had any feedback about confusion using Flood Safe Columbia. And I ask because I work at the basin scale, so Canada down to the mouth. And so when I saw that at first, I was like, what does this have to do with the drainage districts? So I don't know if that perspective is broad enough that it would cause confusion, but I just had to ask if you've had anyone confused as to this geographic scope.
So far, no. And on our website, kind of front and center, we do reference urban Multnomah County. So hopefully that helps orient people to our scope of work. But so far, no one's been like, well, are you doing like all the Columbia, but
Okay, good.
Yeah.
I'm
Kathy,
glad.
I think where we saw more confusion was people's orientation to their corner storm drain or to the Willamette River. Those were really where people went in our district anyway.
Okay, good. That's great. Thank you.
Just one other little note, not to minimize the flood safety needs for some of the agricultural districts, but other than the Tri-Cities, the Portland metro region is the only major city along that Columbia River. So it does help orientating that way as well. But yeah, there are many other, it's a big basin, right?
Right. Right. And interestingly, there's also a growing concern about flooding within the district, within the managed floodplain that's caused by a Pineapple Express stalling over our area. And that Cluvine risk or the internal basin flooding has a very significant impact. And so that will be part of the message that we get when we get the "yeah, but what about" questions from our neighbors. So, you know, the events in California this past year have really heightened everybody's concern about that. So this is an opportunity as much as anything else to educate people.
Yeah, absolutely. And part of our strategy, communication strategy, is if there are other flooding events due to heavy rain throughout the region, you know, kind of pointing to those and being like, that could have happened here. That storm could have easily been in this area and would have put our system to the same test.
Right. And then I guess the other thing that comes back to the necessity to communicate, you did notice that in the category of don't know, before and after they heard the message, there was a significant change. And in that instance, almost all of it went to being positive for the upcoming bond issue. So one of the things I would really encourage all of us to do is to communicate frequently and emphatically with all of our neighbors, because they're going to listen to us and learn from us. And that's what's going to get this bond measure passed so that we can keep them safe. Okay. Since you're, Aster, from your perspective, did you get the kind of feedback that you need?
I did. Yeah, this is helpful. Thank you.
Okay, excellent. The next, so if we're done with that element of it, next up, we have a brief PMLS update from Colin.
Yes, and thank you. And I'm just going to give a 2 or 3 minute intro and then hand it over to Armand, who has the real content here. But Colin Rowan, Director of Planning and Public Affairs at MCDD, I wanted to give you just a quick review of where we're coming from and where we are going before Armand really talks about upcoming board actions and the steps to get there. So just as a quick reminder, in August of 2021, we completed the feasibility study, the feasibility phase of the Portland Metro Levy System study. The federal government found federal interest in reinvesting in our system. And the subsequent phase after that is the design phase, pre-construction engineering and design. In December of 2022, this past December, we achieved 2 really great milestones. We were included in the Water Resources Development Act of 2022. That is a act of Congress authorizing the construction of this project. And we also received the annual appropriations that allowed Portland District of the Army Corps of Engineers to really begin this design phase. As a reminder, the design phase, pre-construction engineering design, you'll hear PED said as the acronym for it. It's a 3.5-year phase. It is a 65-35% split between the federal government and us as the non-federal sponsors. Really huge amount of thanks to the state of Oregon and the Levy Grant Fund, part of the Oregon Business Development Department, which awarded funding for the 4 drainage districts, 80% of that non-federal match. Armand will talk about some of the details there. The first tranche of money has found its way from Washington, D.C. to the Portland District to begin working on the design agreement as well as the early parts of the design. They've put together their team, including the technical lead and PM. I want to give a huge amount of appreciation to Mark Wilcox, who's the PM for the drainage districts on this for PMLS, and he's keeping us organized and keeping a lot of plates spinning in the air as we move forward. So before Armand goes through our upcoming steps for the board, I just want to let you know some of the other pieces that are moving on in the background. Appropriations are needed annually. And so we are in the process of making those requests for the federal fiscal year 24 appropriations. We're in a really good place for that. We had support from the city of Portland, Metro, and the Port of Portland, all to put in letters of support for what's called congressionally designated spending requests, also known as earmarks. That was put in with the Oregon delegation. Timing is funny with all of this, but almost immediately, the week after all of those request letters were put in and our formal request was made, the president's budget was released and we were included. PMLS was included in the president's budget. And so that is a recommendation. It's not a, obviously it is an act of Congress, not of the executive branch that actually creates the appropriations, but it's a really good place. It moves us from being an earmark or sort of a special request into being a programmatic request for the overall Army Corps of Engineers program. So it's a great sign of being in line for federal fiscal year 24 funding. And then the other piece that is moving on in the background with support of our federal advocate, Julie Minerva in Washington, is for the construction phase to actually move forward, we need to have a new start designation. And that is something that we're going to need by spring of 2026, but we're beginning the work, really just getting all of the work that is needed to make that request so that we have it well in advance of spring of 2026. But just want you to know that we are lining up to get that new start designation. With that, I want to hand it over to Armand and take any questions at the end. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Colin. Good afternoon, Pen 2 board. Armand Resto Spots, MCDD Associate District Counsel. Am I coming through okay? Great. Yeah, so as Colin just mentioned, I want to take a few minutes to really provide an overview and sort of a primer on anticipated board actions that are going to be coming up for the design phase work. Staff collectively thought it would be very helpful to check in with all the district boards to provide this overview and to really clarify what these next steps are to get this design phase underway. This is a lot of information, a lot of moving parts, if you need additional time to think about this, or you have questions that come up to you, don't hesitate to send us those way to get those answered. In your packet, I've included a memo. It's on page 60, I believe, is the beginning of it. And all the information I'm about to talk about right here is in that memo. Please refer back to it if you want to think about these things a little bit more. The way I've structured that memo and the way I'll talk about it today is I tried to lay out these steps chronologically. What actions will the boards take? Step 1, step 2, step 3. In reality, we'll probably be doing a number of these proposed actions at the same meeting or just at subsequent meetings or concurrently. There's some crossover there. But let's get into it. So as Colin just mentioned, we are looking to really get moving on this design phase work. We can officially begin, I would say that phase would start when we contract with the Corps under a design agreement. This is the overarching master contract that will control that entire phase. I've included a working draft of that design agreement in your packet. It's attached to my memo. It's based on a model design agreement that the Corps employs nationwide. Many of those terms are template in nature, very unlikely to change. The minor provisions that may change from the working draft you have as of April of 23 are the final numbers for the PED phase costs. That number might wiggle up and down, but we don't even anticipate movement on that at this stage. So just a heads up that that's in your packet so you can get familiar with that. To get to signing that agreement, we need to take at least 4, if not maybe 5 steps to get there. And they can be seen in 2 different realms. 2 steps are financing in nature, making sure that we have the funding to begin the phase. And then the other steps are legal in nature. So let's start with the funding piece. If you recall, as local sponsor for this CORS project, we are responsible for a 35% match in the design against the government's 65%. Back in February of 2022, each of the district boards passed resolutions agreeing to share equally in financing that local match. That agreement was contingent on 2 things happening. One was each district receiving levy grant funds from the state of Oregon through Business Oregon. And then number 2, that the districts would enter into a cost-sharing intergovernmental agreement. And so to start with that first condition, the state of Oregon grants, as Colin just mentioned, those Business Oregon grants are going to fund up to 80% of our local match. So an amazing award. And just yesterday, I've received confirmation on our requested minor revision to those amendments. In my memo, I indicated that we were awaiting some amended language in those contracts, and we've just received those yesterday. And so I anticipate getting those final contracts back any day now. And we will plan on having those back for this board and the other districts as well in May. And with that funding secured, the next step is the cost share IGA between the legacy districts. That IGA, functionally speaking, is going to do a couple things. It's going to outline the cost allocations between each district. So how each district is sharing equally in financing that local share. It's going to provide the steps in the process for how that money is essentially pooled together, and then how the Joint Contracting Authority will then remit that payment to the Corps pursuant to the design agreement. We anticipate having a draft for that IGA for this board's review next month as well. So those are the 2 funding pieces. Concurrently with that is 2 other legal steps that this board and each of the legacy districts will need to take to execute that design agreement. As with prior arrangements with the Army Corps of Engineers regarding the PMLS, as in the feasibility study in 2018, for example, we've employed the Joint Contracting Authority to act as the local sponsor, the non-federal sponsor for that project. Again, the Corps sees this as a system-wide project. This work is benefiting the entire system as a whole. And so we're going to be again recommending that the JCA act as the non-federal sponsor in the design phase. And realistically, all that means is that the JCA is going to be the party signing the design agreement. So to get there, the first step that we'll need to do is we'll be proposing resolutions for every district board to assign to the JCA the authority to execute that design agreement. And so each district board will be able to look at that final design agreement when we have that, possibly at the next meeting, possibly in June. We'll talk about that, we'll clarify terms, answer questions, and then the proposal would be that the districts then authorize the JCA to sign on their behalf. Final piece, with every district assigning that authority, the JCA then has that requisite authority to sign that final design agreement. And so the JCA would meet, would by resolution accept those assignments, and then by resolution authorize the executive director to sign the design agreement. With that, the design phase would formally be underway. We are under contract, work begins. Happy to answer questions on that process. As I mentioned, all of that's in the memo, but we can talk about some of your questions here or afterwards, whatever, whenever those come up for you. And if I missed anything, Colin, please chime in, but I'll pause there.
Okay. So with that, let's get feedback from the board for Armand. First, to welcome him. He is a new hire here, about 6 months now, and we're delighted to see him. Do you have questions for Armand on this? So, Mary Helen or Kathy, anything that you would ask?
Hi, this is Kathy. I don't have any questions at this time. I think once we see the next step, which is the agreement to sign off on the JCA signing off on our behalf, I will.
No doubt that there will be some more pertinent questions there once we have a final agreement to look at. But Armand, just in terms of the process, will our board ever have any sort of oversight over the design of the levy as it affects our neighborhoods?
It might be an appropriate question for Colin there. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's a great question, Eric. So the design is done by the Corps, but it needs to meet local expectations, I guess. And so one thing that we will be doing and that the Corps is really interested in having us do this summer is basically property by property assessment of things like curb and gutter and ADA accessibility, and also things like landscaping and other items like where bins are stored for waste products. And so the Corps really does want to design something that is compatible with the needs of the community while meeting that flood safety standard. And so I think that's going to be, there will be a survey as well as basically site walks. Aster, as well as our Kearns and West consultants, will be supporting that work. So that, I think, is one place to bring in a lot of good direction for the Corps. And then as far as the actual design that the Corps does, MCDD engineering will need to sign off on the operability of that. And so we need, the Corps is coming in, making this large federal investment, and then handing over perpetual responsibility for O&M to the districts. And so we need to sign off on that operability as well as providing direction on what the actual designs look like. We'll also be bringing in the city of Portland, especially for Bridgeton Road. It's really important to make sure that their designs are compatible with the street standards of the city as well as stormwater standards in particular. So that was a long way of saying yes, but it is different than the Penn 2 board basically getting to sort of make a check as far as yes or no.
Right. And so I think that it really is important for the Penn 2 board to be responsible to our neighbors in that regard. And so there needs to be some opportunity for us to say, yes, we've reviewed it, we're working on your behalf, and this is really in the best interest of everyone involved. Because surveys get lost, and as I now understand the timing of this, we're going to be at the tail end. Penn 2 will be at the tail end of any sort of construction. And we've never received a phase by phase budget from USACE, but we all know the problem, which is that the guy that's the end of the tail ends up taking all of the shrink from overruns in other phases of the project. So we need to be able to assure our neighbors that we have adequately protected them from those kinds of adverse events. So how do you think that we can make this work in the process?
Well, Can I add on to a little bit of what Eric said? I've struggled since I joined this meeting, going through a stack of probably 200 sheets of paper of proposed budgets, this budget, that budget. And there's no like proposed budget version 1, version 2, version 3. There's the April 20th one. And it's, from my standpoint, and it might be my inability to cope with 100 pages of documents, and sometimes we only get them a week in advance. And so when you start talking about, we'll get you more information in May, is that another budget? There's terms that I saw in Gloria's presentation, and I'll save those coming up, but I'd not seen the term privilege tax ever before in any other budgets. Maybe I missed it. So it's really difficult from a volunteer board member who has a life to live beyond Pen 2 time to deal with how we're going to be involved in the process and how we're not involved in the process. And my one example is the $100,000 spent for community engagement. It was a random figure based on landowners, and I will speak to that later if there's an opportunity, but we weren't asked if we wanted to spend that $40,000 or how we wanted it to be spent, or if it even should be spent. And when, and Astor wasn't around when the community engagement happened along Bridgeton, all the different walks. I think Val went on a couple of them, I did, and the 2 women whose names escape me from U.S. Army Corps of Engineers basically said, we don't do community engagement, but we're doing this as a favor to MCDD. So I find it lacking specifics of how we are going to be involved, that we won't go forward unless this happens or unless you approve it. The $100,000 community engagement was put in the budget as if we approved it, and we haven't. And so it pains me a little to how I can be a responsible board member and provide financial oversight and accountability to my neighbors when I don't know the answers. And if it's my inability, then I'll join Val on the sidelines and someone else that has more accounting background or technical background. But I think that it needs to be more clear of how it's viewed that the board is involved. Are we just a, this is probably going to go over bad, but are we just arm candy that we're the board that oversees what goes on and the staff lets us know what needs to be done? But I couldn't tell you right now what the proposed budget was. There are support services. I don't see a definition of what support services are. New responsibilities. I didn't see what definition of new responsibilities were. But I'm supposed to be able to know what the budget is. And so if Lori's going to cover that later, that's fine. I'll be quiet.
Thank you, Mayor Helen. I think that we're on this issue of this is a major project, and we need checkoff points to demonstrate that we are being accountable and responsible to the people that have elected us. And what I'm asking Armand and Colin is, how can we build this into the design agreement? Do we have the authority to say it meets the minimum standards for our neighborhoods?
And I can jump in on that. And I think the milestones are really important. And so the next milestone, the design agreement, is the first milestone. As Armand mentioned, it is a largely boilerplate agreement. The details there are agreements between the Corps, drainage districts, and the city of Portland for coordination. And so we are working on getting basically a time and date effectively of where they would be able to meet and get some consensus on which standards the Corps will be designing to. As far as this board, a really important milestone is moving from the design phase into the construction phase. So you have to even begin that, it will actually begin closer to a year before construction, where there is a public partnership agreement. And that really is the next major milestone as far as whether or not you want to continue moving forward with the Army Corps in this product.
Okay, so will you bring to the board the design to be approved?
So the design, we'll be able to bring the design that the Corps is working on. It is very different than the board approving it. It is really going to be a decision about signing the public partnership agreement if you want to move forward and actually construct that. That is different than the board approving the design. Just want to clarify that I recognize that is different, but there isn't a formal design that the Corps will bring to you to approve. It really is the milestone that they use is the contracting milestone. I see Hong might be able to provide a little more detail there too.
No, I don't think that's really necessary. I want you to think about what your board has been saying. Our neighbors are very concerned about this, even down to landscaping. And they want to have an effective mechanism of influencing the Corps in terms of that. And what is that mechanism?
May I?
Yes.
Alrighty. So the program you're under is a federal project program. It's one that this district has been involved in with and partnered with the district, the Corps back in the 40s, 30s. So it's subject to federal law, it's subject to federal standard, and it's subject to the Corps' design parameters and criteria. Beyond that, Eric, through this program, or at least through the design agreement, and the design is a product of the Corps' work, it is limited, it is going to be up to whatever the federal flood control standards are for the Corps. Beyond that and outside of that, to the extent that the city of Portland, Penn 2 neighborhoods have additional things it wants to better reflect its local desires, maybe increase protection or more plants, more trees, then that's a separate, that has to be it's a separate argument, a separate component of the design that would have to be added to. Whether the Corps can incorporate those betterments, I think is right now a subject of discussion between us and the Corps, and when that timing is going to be. So for purposes of the federal funding, federal contribution share to the design and the construction, it will be to the Corps standards, and it may not be consistent with your the neighborhood's desires.
I'm also concerned about the stated policies of the city of Portland, particularly in terms of the streets and the sewer system and BDS's requirements for major construction projects. Now, those are probably not in federal standards. How do they get decided?
Colin?
I can jump in on some of that. So for the actual streetscape, that needs to be replaced in kind by the Corps. And so therefore they need to coordinate with the city and basically get the street design manual from the city and make sure they go through and build that to all of the city's standards. Because they are taking up something that's there, they'll put something back down that meets the city's standards. As far as, you know, the city has its own specific stormwater standards that are largely similar to other federal approved standards. And so that is what we're working between the city and the Corps to come together on to meet those. And Bill probably will be able to provide some of the slope standards. I am already over my skis beyond that, but it is something that the Corps and the city will be meeting on. That's the date that we want to make sure that they are able to coordinate and make that come to an agreement on which stormwater standard they're going to design to, and so that the city will be supportive of that work.
Got it. So one of the critical issues for both the East Columbia and Bridgeton neighborhood is burying the utilities. And that's the current standard for any new construction. And as long as the city is saying that replacing kinds meets their currently enforceable standard, then that's something that I think that the neighborhoods, both along Marine Drive and on Bridgeton Road, would strongly support. Okay.
Ricky, is it
so-
overhead right now?
I'm sorry?
Are the
They're
utility
overhead right
lines?
now.
Okay,
And
got
for
it,
a
got
lot of energy continuity issues, it's safer if they're underground, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You know, there's good reason to go ahead and bury them. So
Sure.
that while we're digging up Bridgeton Road, if all it takes is putting in something in the overbuild that carries the utilities, great. But I do want that sense that we are meeting the current design standard to be in place. What this really brings us to is a sense that, I feel like the first time when I was 19 years old and a sophomore at Johns Hopkins, and I had to go out into the student ghetto and sign a lease. And the Reverend who owned the building got me a lease that was pre-printed and just sort of came to me and just said, well, sign here, son, you'll be okay. Ever since that time, whenever I see, oh, this is sort of a pro forma one. So I'm going to ask both Hong and Armand, are there clauses within that design agreement that if it were negotiable, you would end up changing to better protect our Pen 2 company?
I think the key point there is if negotiable, but I'll let the lawyers discuss that and Colin can chime in too.
I'll defer that to Armand since he's
Yeah.
spent quite a bit of time looking
Yeah,
at this, and
that's-
I will follow his lead.
Right, thanks, Hong. That's a very interesting way of phrasing that, Eric. I see what you're getting at, though. My initial answer is no, because if there is a non-negotiable term that we could not advise any board to be signing, I don't think we would be working with this agreement. So at some level, we have to get comfortable with it. Now, having said that, this agreement, if you do spend some time with it, is really a process agreement. It is really just outlining terms and conditions to get to that end work product. A lot of the questions I've heard thus far are more so about what do the discussions look like to create the product, right? But the agreement's really about timing, consistency of payment for the design work to get us to that end. So it's really a straightforward contract all in all. Are there terms in here that if we drafted it, would they look different? Of course, right? Because we're a unique drainage district system, but altogether, no, there's no terms at this point that we haven't all discussed and felt comfortable with moving forward on, so.
And I'll just add, Eric, that at the end, I think we provided you a copy of the draft agreement with some certifications by your counsel, by your CFO, on financial capability, legal capability. And so it would be on us to bring it to you if we feel like we can't sign off on that. So you'll have at least that assurance.
I think the other piece is the Corps' authority is kind of limited. So that's where we're going to need to aim our attention to the city of Portland and the urban board to create enough revenue to do those betterments or additional investments to get the community to where it wants to be. So we may not be able to argue with the feds as much as we can take matters into our own hands and work with our local partners to achieve the results the community desires.
Okay, so the reason that we're spending so much time on this is that once the design is set and we get to the 30% level, it's not going to change. We've worked with Interstate Bridge Replacement, and we understand that as soon as they say, this is where this interchange is going to go, but we're willing to consider others, no. And so I want you as our staff to really recognize that within the community, there is a great deal of skepticism about what a Cat 9 bulldozer is going to do to my petunia bed. And it's quite real. And so anything that you can do that would bring them into the design process, give them checkoffs, give them the feedback so that the Corps doesn't make a horrid mistake is going to be important. And I think that getting the involvement of the community is really a critical element to that. So with that, I want to thank you for your diligence in going through this document and moving us in the order that we're looking for. We are still looking for those checkoff points where we come back to you and say, we've got approval for it. So we'll continue to work with you on it.
Can I just add something to what
I
Eric
just want to
said?
do a time check. I apologize, Mary Helen. So
Okay.
we're at 2:35, and so we're about a half an hour behind schedule, and we really want to get to the budget and CIP
Okay.
as well.
I understand that, but I think just the opportunity for input, it doesn't mean they can decide, and it doesn't mean because they speak, but just the opportunity that they have an opportunity to speak about their petunia bed is most important. And that's true of any community engagement. So I think that's the important part to take away from this.
Okay. So again, thank you very much for this very diligent work on your part, and I appreciate everything that you've done for this. Next up is Lori with the budget.
Just real quick, thank you guys. This was really helpful and helps us remember how critical our focus on some of the neighborhood impacts needs to be throughout this entire process. So your comments are really duly noted and appreciated, and we're working every day with Portland and the Corps to try and achieve what you've asked us to achieve. So thank you, and I appreciate the consistent direction that you're providing, and we will work hard to implement it. Lori, I think you're up.
Okay, let me pull up my slides. So today we're going to review the proposed budget for Pen 2 for fiscal year 23-24. Mary Helen, we will not be talking about the forecast for the urban district today. That will be next week. So it sounded like some of your questions were related to that forecast, and that's a presentation that is going to happen next week. We're not asking for any action from the board today, and we will be returning on May 24th when we can review any proposed changes and recommendations that we receive from the board. In the time between this meeting and May 24th, please send any budget questions to Jim and I, and we'll create a Q&A document to share with all of the board members. We will be presenting the budget for adoption at the format meeting on June 20th. And I will just say at this point that we do know, with the information that was provided by McKenna today, as well as some conversation that you'll get into with Bill when he reviews the CIP, that we know there are changes to this budget. I always say that the minute you print it, it's wrong, and there's always some updates and changes that need to be made, and that is the situation here. The information that McKenna received didn't come in until after this information had been sent out to all of you, and so I did not have time to make those changes. She has provided me with her numbers, and I'll be going through the budget and the forecast and making sure that we align everything so that it makes sense, but it does not align right now. So if you're trying to tie numbers between what McKenna provided you earlier and what's in the budget, I guarantee you that they will not be the same. With that, I will move on to our agenda. So this is our agenda for today. We'll start off our presentation with Jim sharing an overview of the budget. We'll then take a look at the key financial issues that should be considered in our budget process. We'll look at the projections for the ending operating fund balances at each of the districts. And I'll be reviewing the proposed budget summary and walking you through the revenues and materials and services proposed. Finally, we'll take a look at those capital projects, which we know some of those numbers will be changing, and there'll be some decisions for you all as board members to provide us some feedback and give you an opportunity to ask questions. I know we're running short on time, so if we do run out of time at the end, please do email those questions and we'll get them to you, get the responses to you as soon as we can. With that, I'll hand it over to Jim.
I would just say, in the interest of time, this budget is relatively consistent with this year's budget, the current year's budget. We've tried really hard as a staff to limit cost increases. We've shared with all the boards the MCDD budget because it contains the staff, and we had a lot of questions from different board members because the MCDD budget decisions impact you guys and the costs that you can incur as a district. I also want to say that this budget, as proposed, gives us adequate funding to continue to safely and effectively operate the system within Penn 2 and to handle a number of capital project needs that are required to continue safe operations. It also provides sufficient revenue for us to continue on the path of standing up the urban district and moving towards more sustainable revenues for the overall system and to a more efficient governance structure and capital program. So with that, the last thing I want to say is this is the proposed budget, and this is your chance after you hear this today to think about it, to follow up with us individually or as a group, to ask us more questions. This is the time that we're presenting our best recommendations to you as a board, and then you'll have time to digest that and come back to us with changes or recommendations that you would like us to incorporate, and then that will be presented to you in late June. I think it's June 20th at the format meeting for adoption. So again, would stress that there's time here for you guys to raise questions or concerns about this budget. And I know we're short on time today, so if we run out of time, please know that we stand ready to give you the information you need to feel comfortable in making a decision on this budget. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Lori, and I appreciate all of you for your time today.
Thank you. So as we review the proposed budget, board members should also be considering some of the key financial issues that Penn 2 is facing. We're continuing to be faced with challenges related to compression of our assessment revenues. We did see improvements with the Prologis project properties this year, but compression is still impacting our revenues. Finally, the district proposed budget includes funding support for communications spending by the urban district this year, and I know that there has been some discussion around that. So if there are further questions, we can address those. And we do have some large capital projects that result in spend down of capital reserves. That's going to change a little bit, and there'll be some conversation about that and some decision making around those projects. So with that, I'll just move on to fund balances. So as we look towards integration of the districts into the new urban district, our fund balance projections are a good way to understand timelines and the importance of moving forward with some of these decisions that are facing the urban board. This chart shows the projected fund balances for each of the 4 legacy districts. Should real life follow the numbers in the budget, which you all know my opinion on that one. It's our best guess, but certainly don't guarantee that they are exact. The information we're reviewing here aligns with the projections provided years ago by our former budget manager, Casey. And for most of the districts, the numbers we need to be aware of are those dollars available for general operations. These are our undesignated and operating reserves, which on this chart are in the blue. For MCDD, current operations are supported through drawdowns on operating fund balances, as well as a 9% increase in assessments for the property owners in that district. MCDD will not have enough resources in fiscal year 24-25 to continue operating at the same level they are operating at today. Additionally, because a portion of the funds are restricted, we'll need to consider interim financing for operating funding, such as paying payroll for the early months in the fiscal year before assessments are collected. This isn't unusual for local governments to have to do this sort of funding to fill that gap period before normally their property taxes, but also our assessments are collected. But it is new for this district. We've been able to have adequate fund balances in the past to be able to carry us through that time period. In general, we need around $3 million in unrestricted or operating funds to operate until assessment revenues are collected, which starts around the middle of November, with the bulk of it coming in December. If actual financial results of the district align with this budget, we'll have just over $1.1 million in operating funds at the beginning of July 2024. So not enough money to be able to carry us through to that time period. Pen 1 continues to operate at a deficit, which is being covered by the city of Portland. Pen 2 is also supporting current operations using drawdowns on operating fund balance, and that'll be one of those decisions that we talk about at the end of this presentation. I did get direction from the board before we started pulling this budget together not to make any rate increases, so you're seeing the impact of that here. Pen 2, if we look at this situation as it stands right now, would not have enough resources in fiscal year 24-25 to continue operating at the same level they're operating at today. SDIC is able to fund their operations without drawing down on their fund balance. However, their challenge is on the capital side, where there's estimated to be over $12 million in capital costs for the replacement of the pump station in fiscal year 2027. That's part of the PMLS projects. So as long as we move forward with the PMLS projects, they'll be able to have that cost covered. But if something were to occur and that didn't proceed, then they would need to be able to identify that $12 million to be able to fund that replacement. The urban district is budgeted to spend down all fund balance by the end of fiscal year 2024, with one caveat there is that there's $220,000 worth of election fees in that budget. So if we don't go through the election process, then those fees would carry forward into the next year's budget. This fund balance information is consistent with what was provided to board members a few years ago. The transition to the urban district and implementation of new funding mechanisms will allow us to address these funding shortfalls. Next, I just want to walk you through information on the proposed budget for MCDD on the staffing area. So you have the full copy of the proposed budget for MCDD in your packet. The proposed budget for MCDD personnel costs is $7 million. This line item includes wages, benefits such as health insurance, Oregon PERS retirement, employer taxes, and employee support such as training. The budgeted employee count is the same as fiscal year 22-23 with no new positions proposed. The budget for wages includes a 4% cost of living increase and a 2% merit adjustment. The MCDD board is still looking at those numbers. As you can see in the pie chart, the operations departments included in the green section total 20 FTEs, and the support services departments, which you can see in the blue, totals 18 FTEs. So you can see the departments that are considered support services. You can find additional details on those pay schedules and positions included in the MCDD's proposed budget document. So that's new information. The entire set of pay schedules is included in the back of that document, as well as the FTEs by department with their position level, so that you can go back to the salary chart and see what their salary aligns with. In your package, you'll find the full proposed budget document for Pen 2. There's quite a few pages of narrative that try to explain changes and what's included in each of these line items. This is a summary of that budget. On the resource side of the equation, we're starting with $2.2 million of carry forward dollars in the beginning fund balance. The proposed budget anticipates no increases in assessment rate with a 16% tax compression rate. We're assuming 5% loss to discounts, adjustments, and delinquencies, and I'll talk in a little more detail about these numbers on a slide coming forward. Contract revenues are the stormwater fee payments received from the city of Portland. And other revenue includes $25,000 in interest earnings on funds that are sitting in the local government investment pool, $2,000 in miscellaneous revenues, and $4,000 in development fees. There's also grant revenues here supporting the PMLS local match contributions from OBDD of $323,000 and grant revenue for the 13th Avenue Pipe project that is projected in this budget document at $585,000, but you'll see some shift in that funding as we work with those numbers, those new numbers that came out late last week. Materials and services of $1.2 million includes system maintenance costs and operating supplies, non-capital projects, professional services, and administrative expenses. The increase is mainly in the non-capital project category with OSHA fall protection projects of $65,000, and that has moved from the capital category. The budget was not aligning with how we account for those costs, so we're getting that corrected in the budget this year. Slough levee riverward modernization of $150,000 is also in those non-capital projects. Roof repairs at the Schmear Road pump station of $30,000 and $60,000 for a pump and motor rebuild at the 13th Avenue pump station. The proposed budget has $1.9 million in capital spending, and I'll talk a little more about those details on a future slide. Debt service reflects principal and interest that's due to be paid on outstanding borrowing. The proposed ending fund balance is $1.1 million. So you can see the fund balance is going down because we're going from 2.2 to 1.1. The proposed budget leaves less than $100,000 in capital reserves, but that will change as we start to see the shifting of those projects. This is mainly because of the local funding that was needed on the 13th Avenue pipe project, but like I said, we'll see a little bit of shift. So this is a chart of the proposed revenue budget with assessments at $1.1 million, contract revenues of $78,000, and grants of $900,000. We'll look at the details behind the calculation of the assessment revenues on the next slide. So here, this chart walks us through the calculation of the assessment revenues. We'll start with the total assessment from the 22-23 fiscal year of $1.3 million. The proposed budget currently has 0 rate increase, but I will ask the question at the end of this presentation, is that still where you feel you need to be as a board? And you may not be able to answer that, but it's something to start thinking about. This means that our assessment amount remains consistent. Something to keep in mind and keep this slide handy, a 1% increase in assessment rate will only provide an additional $10,000 in revenue collected. So there are things that impact this revenue that we'll walk through next, but it's not a lot of money. So when you start to talk about rate increases can have a fairly large impact on your residents. But it doesn't give us a whole lot of dollars when it comes to funding. Now, let me walk you through why that is. So in this calculation, first we take out the direct billings because we take out the compression. The compression is estimated at 16%, which is reflective of our current experience with compression of assessments. So that brings us to an imposed amount, the amount that actually shows up on the tax bills of $1.1 million. Taxpayers receive a discount of 3% if they pay their tax bills, including assessments by November 15th. Additionally, there are normally adjustments to our assessments every year, and not all assessments are collected in a timely manner. So some people just can't pay their taxes. We're using a total estimate of 5% of assessments after compression to estimate the impact of all those discounts, adjustments, and collectability. And that's been a pretty consistent number over the years when you look at the historical experience. At this point, we add back the payment from taxpayers of prior year balances and interest. So those people that were behind and in that group of 5% people, they will sometimes pay late, sometimes sell the property, and the property taxes will come in that way. So that's what this is. And that brings us to our total assessments collected that's just under $1.1 million. So even though you start at 1.3, there is the impact of these other issues that bring us down just a little bit. This slide shows the breakdown of expenditures by type. As you can see, capital outlay makes up the largest part of Penn 2's spending in this proposed budget. Materials and services, including maintenance and supplies, projects and planning, contracts and agreements, professional services and administrative expenses will all be walked through on the next slide. We'll review capital outlay on an upcoming slide as well. Debt service includes both interest and principal that are being paid on outstanding debt. So this shows the breakdown of materials and services expenditures in the proposed budget. Levy and grounds maintenance of $114,000 includes the fixed fee for maintenance paid to MCDD of $97,000. That agreement had a 3-year fixed fee payment that escalates a little bit each year. So this $97,000 is year 2 of the fixed fee arrangement. Operating supplies of $46,000 is for electricity. We are experiencing 15 to 20% rate increases on our electricity. So this amount is going up in this year's, in the 23-24 budget. Professional services of $116,000 includes legal services of $48,000, audit fees of $16,000, and government relations of $19,000. Professional services have decreased over $46,000 from the fiscal year 22-23 budget, mainly because of the reduction in legal expenses. Contracts and agreements includes a scheduled payment to JCA of $76,000, payment of almost $220,000 to MCDD for administrative services under the fixed fee agreement, and that new payment of $40,000 to the urban district to support communication and outreach to Penn 2 residents. Administrative expenses of almost $48,000 includes $13,000 for liability insurance, $13,000 for events and sponsorships, and $15,000 for community education. Administrative expenses are $1,800 higher than the fiscal year 22-23 budget. So this is our list of capital projects that are included in the proposed budget. Bill will be talking to you more about the capital improvement plan next, although we're running out of time. What I will say is we do have a question for you on the Schmier Road pump station electrical upgrades. We could defer that project. It's partially funded by a restricted fund balance. But there's a couple $100,000 worth of savings that could occur if we were to defer that project. The 13th Avenue pump station discharge pipes, if you recall, there was about $615,000 that needed to sit here. So a portion of that project is going to get deferred and pushed forward. The SCADA system upgrade should remain, and here's your $400,000 for the PMLS projects. So this is the information that gives you a summary of the PMLS project costs for the first 3 years of the project. So we're currently anticipating that year 1 spending will occur in the current fiscal year, but it is entirely within the realm of possibility that we'll see those amounts shift to fiscal year 23-24 with all of the discussion that we had earlier about the agreements and what needs to happen to get everything to come together. Within a 2-month period, we'll see whether that happens or not. If not, we will need to make 2 years worth of payments in 23-24, and we'll make those shifts in the budget to make sure that we're reflecting that. Oops, let me go back. So the top section shows the total obligation to the Corps of Engineers for each of the first 3 years. The federal share, as you heard earlier, is 65%, and the local match is 35%. The allocation of the local match is shared equally between the 4 districts. Each district is covering 80% of the local match with the OBDD grants, and the remainder of the local match is provided by the district, either with assessment revenues or capital reserves, or in Penn 1, it's actually receiving some funding support from local partners to cover that 20%. So we're at the question place, and I know we don't have a lot of time. I do want to say the decision points for you as board members, some of the feedback we'd like to hear would be in regard to an assessment rate change. Are you still comfortable with not making a change to the assessment rates? We will make sure to get the updates for the 13th Avenue Pipe project into the next round, and we'll be bringing that next round of information to you in May so that you can see what that looks like. And then just some thought process after you've heard from Bill about whether you want to proceed with the electrical project or whether you want to hold off and defer that project for a couple of years. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing. That is my presentation, and apologies, I think we only have a minute left in our meeting time. Sorry, Eric, you're muted.
You're muted.
Right. I think that Wendy did that so that we didn't have any background noise during your presentation. Are we allowed to, as we've done in the past, budget a contingency amount? We should be able to have at least 10%, right?
You can budget a contingency amount. I would say when you look at the fund balances, it's pretty tight, and we may have some room for play with that when we make those adjustments to the capital projects. But historically, the districts have not funded a contingency. What I will say to you is, oh, sorry, my computer just made a weird noise. As you experience this year, because the district is not subject to Oregon local budget law, if we happen upon an event that would require us to need contingency funds, we can come back to the board and make an adjustment to the budget. That's allowable since we're not subject to Oregon local budget law. We're not allowed to do that sort of thing with the urban district because they are subject to Oregon local budget law. So there's more restrictions on how we can make changes to the budgets. But for this district, if something were to occur that created the need for more budget authority or spending authority, we would come back to the board to have that discussion.
Okay. And then, you know, as I look at the 4 key takeaways from this, one is that we're running out of cash, right? And,
yes.
And this has my full and complete attention, and it is an absolutely critical issue. What we'll need to decide is whether it's because we haven't had enough reserves built up in the past, or whether we should be taking on additional either construction financing or long-term debt associated with the projects that we have undertaken. The second thing that's a key takeaway for me is that if you look at our capital funding, we have well over $1.3 million that's coming from outside sources, right? So kudos to everyone there. These are things that we need to do. And yes, we were surprised by the 13th Avenue pump station, but we've been able to mitigate that. And so when I look at this, I really am focused on what our net capital outlay is and what that will do. I'm probably not as concerned, Val would may counsel me differently about restricted versus unrestricted, you know, but the unrestricted balances are the ones that I really focus on, because the restricted, we've got a specified use for that. And as a result, what I do is I tend to look at what is the amount that we have in the unspecified reserve, how much do we have in terms of operating expenses in cash, and you build a budget that maintains at least 4 months. So I'm getting comfortable with that. But over and above that, you know, we've got to be real cognizant that without some sort of additional financing for our capital projects, we've got a dead-on date that moves based upon when we spend the money for 13th, sometime in 2025.
Correct.
So with those are the key messages that I take away from it. We do have borrowing capacity. We're going to be debt-free this coming year. Correct?
Correct.
And we hope to pass a capital bond to fix your capital problem. So.
Right. And so there are a number of things that are falling into place here that's going to make it, you know, particularly important for us, Lori, to communicate with our board about, as we shift funds around, what does that do to the date that we run out of cash? And what are the decisions that we need to make today? So I look at something like deferring the electrical upgrade and say, well, yeah, but if I push it out a year, I could have as much as a 15 or 20% increase in that project cost. So we need to be really aware of where we're spending money and what those elements are. So, Val, in your experience, have you ever run across a situation that has as significant a negative forecast?
I've never been responsible for managing this much money.
I mean, I think that, and this is really a policy question for this board, that several years ago, certainly before I arrived, the organization put itself on a path to get to where we are today in hopes that the new district would be stepping in. We're getting closer to that. I was hoping to get that done a year ahead of time. We still have a hope of doing that, but if you think you need to sort of pull up a little bit, that is, I think, what you're sort of alluding to, President Molander.
Well, and I think that we look at this and we say, we've got to take a very close look at all of those programs that we have in operating expenses. And Lori and I, I'll send a message on to you, Lori, about, does the $30,000 roof repair, is that really capital or operating expense? We can discuss that, but
it's operating.
Because it doesn't extend the life of the asset?
Well, I mean, we can talk accounting theory here, but it has to do with when you first built it, how you capitalized it. And if you split the roof off and give it a different life than the building, then when you replace the roof, you can capitalize it. But if you don't, if you capitalize it all together, which is what we did, then you don't get to capitalize the roof, which doesn't last as long as the building. So it's not extending the life of the complete building.
Okay, so within that, we'll hold that discussion for the two of us, because Mary Helen has now put her head back and is saying, please no. But I think that what we want to do as a board is give you some very direct assessment of those operating projects that we'll have to pull back on. And
I think probably Bill will be the best person to talk to about how critical those projects are. Because the classification is one thing, right? That's just an accounting thing. Right. But the decision making about what was included in those projects happened not on my desk, but on our engineers' desks. And they're really evaluating the risk that is there and what needs to be done. So I think that that's a good conversation for you to have with him about what the decision making was behind what got put into those project budgets for the upcoming year.
And so the next element for our board to undertake is one of the things that it's a lead that we've sort of buried with our constituents, with our landowners, is we don't have a rate increase in for this coming year. And when was the last time that any sort of entity just said, I'm not going to increase your price, particularly in these inflationary times? So we can go forward with communication to them that says, we're not going to do that, and here are the reasons. Or we can say, we need a little bit there. And one of the things that Lori has highlighted is that the compression within our district is higher than for any of the other districts. So MCDD,
except for Penn 1.
Well, yeah, but we all know
Penn 1 is 44%.
Right, and that's because the city of Portland doesn't pay a pilot per se, payment in lieu of taxes, and Metro doesn't pay a pilot per
But they
se.
do pay assessments, yes.
Right. So what we do is we've got to be in a position to say, if even after the development at Portland Meadows, we still expect 16%, which is what we experienced this year.
Yes.
Okay.
So it went down a little bit this year with those improvements.
Current year 16%. Should we consider an increase for the coming year?
And I would say there's two things to consider there. One is, remember that a 1% only gets you about $10,000. So that's really something to consider. Also take a look at the urban forecast, and what we're proposing to do to those properties in the floodplain is have a pretty significant increase when in year one of the urban district. 20% increase is what we're looking at. So it's a balancing act, right? When you look at both of those pieces together.
Mary Helen, just for your benefit, that is what your staff is proposing to you. It has not been decided. So you will be debating that in the future. And that's what was in the second packet that you just got. So
kind of hooked to this question. I did find in the packet where all the people that were getting refunds from that overcharge were, but I didn't see who was going to have to pay. Is there a
MCDD
list?
is going to pay.
MCDD is going to pay.
Oh, they're just going to pay.
No, you've actually, no, MCDD is paying the cost of processing the overpayments, but you received the overpayments. So we're just making you even by paying that money back. MCDD is paying you back for the underpayments, which will make you even with all of your assessments.
But Mary Helen, we're not going to charge any resident or landowner who received an underpayment. MCDD is going to
paying back for that.
Yeah, so we didn't think that was appropriate for us to do because it was our mistake.
And then one other, there's a big long list for Hayden Meadows, and there was a great amount of confusion about who Hayden Meadows are. And there's two corporations. One's TMT Development, one's Amazon and Pro Lodges. So is there a way to find out who those people were? Because
we're using the county data because the county sent the original billings.
Okay.
So it'll be the same people who received the original bill because we're using the same data. Does that make sense?
It makes sense in the world of the confusion over proxy votes in Hayden Meadows, but I'll double look at it because the Vanessa Sturgeon, who's the president of Hayden Meadows TMT Development, had to prove for the proxy vote that she really did own the properties. And so I'll go back and look at the properties and see who they belong to and how they're listed.
She said she did not own the property. That was the issue, but she couldn't proxy the vote because she was not a property owner.
And there may be a difference between who's serving.
I won't argue. Yeah,
I'm happy
not going to argue
to
that
have
point.
a conversation offline about this.
Yeah, no, I won't argue that point now.
So let's so at this point, what the staff is looking for is feedback from us. Kathy, are there specific concerns that you have with this budget, or what's your thinking at this point?
Yeah, thanks, Eric. Largely, I'm concerned about cash flow, as you were speaking to, and what's not clear to me is whether it would be prudent to use debt financing to cover some of those needed repairs, like the roof on the pump house, in order to preserve the cash flow. I guess I just haven't heard a direct answer to whether that's something that the board should take under serious consideration.
I think, Kathy, it's going to look a little different for the upcoming year once you see the shift of the projects. So I think it's difficult to make a recommendation at this point. Like I said, I just recently like late last week, got the information from McKenna about the changes to the 13th Avenue pipe project. So I think that is going to make a difference in what this looks like. So it's a difficult question at this point.
Yeah, so Kathy, basically, if you look at where we are with about $2.1 million in reserves and for a starting balance, we're going to get an additional 150K from the state, so that's a favorable. We aren't going to spend it next year, so our reserve balance actually at the end of this coming fiscal year will look pretty healthy. But it's like knowing that you've got to buy that new car next year. There will be a significant expenditure in 24-25, and I think that one of the things that I'm hearing is that we need to have basically a budget and then a one-year look ahead for when that, so that we can answer Kathy's question about cash flow. Does that make sense, Lori?
Sure, but I think we need to talk offline about that because we have to talk about staffing resources and whether we can do another budget for a future year.
Right, and so that's the reason I termed it a forecast. So we'll do that offline.
Yes.
Okay.
And thank you for the clarification that this is an issue not this fiscal year, but possibly next. And so I don't have a sense of urgency at this moment. Of course, the fiscal year will come up sooner than I care to think about, but I'll just wait to hear more from your follow-up conversations.
I guess I just want to stress this isn't your last chance to come up with questions or ask or provide additional feedback too. So don't feel compelled to have all your thoughts in order today, since we've just presented this to you for the first time. So I want to really assure you that there's some time for you to digest and ask clarifying and in-depth questions that will help you understand better if you need more time.
Awesome, thank you.
Karen, any questions from you? Val?
Karen looks like she fell out of her chair.
No, no. Well, if you'd seen me go off screen, it would have been because my now 4.5-month-old grandson was getting up and I needed to tend to him. But
how exciting that he's there for the board meeting.
Well, I'm here in Seattle, making certain that he's doing fine. Val, any questions?
No, I'm good.
And Mary Helen, what
I'm
question?
good.
You're good. Okay,
Don't anybody fall out of their chair, but I don't have any questions at this point. I will. I'll do my Ask Gladys imitation at the next board meeting.
Okay, well, in fact, we're going to do it before then so that we give the staff plenty of time to be able to resolve it.
Thank you.
And look at a series of alternatives. And I'll work directly on your behalf with the staff to get all that documentation together.
Okay, and I do apologize. I have to leave at 3:30 because I have a video call with my doctor. So,
well, we're going to make certain that you get to that.
I've got the leave button.
Right. So what that doesn't allow us to do is go into the CIP in detail, because this is going to be a major element. What do we have on our next Pen 2 only board meeting?
Wendy, do you have that in front of you?
Yeah, so you're meeting next on May 24th. And so, but I defer to Lori and Bill whether the information in Bill's presentation is important to receive prior to that.
I think it would be helpful for Bill to speak to the electrical project so that you know kind of his thoughts on that one, because we would, before the May meeting, like to get some feedback from the board members as to whether they would like to consider deferring that project. So I think it would be good. You've heard a lot about the 13th Avenue pipe project and that we need to make some changes there. But I do think it would be important for Bill to talk a bit about that electrical project so that you know what we're looking at.
Okay, so Bill, what we'll do is we'll do a short addendum to it and just focus in on the electric upgrade, the nature of that project, the risks associated with delaying it, the benefits of doing it now, and that will be one of the elements that we'll consider as part of our budget.
And I am going to leave so I can get on the Zoom call. But I'll defer to whatever Bill thinks. What would you do? Because I have no idea about electricity. I know much about electricity, except that you can get in a lot of trouble if you hit a live wire. And I was a meter reader once in Alameda, the city of Alameda in California, and had a bad experience with an electric meter. So it's all yours. My vote's whatever you vote, Bill. You're my proxy.
Okay, Mary Helen, have a great Zoom call with your doctor.
Thanks for your time today, Mary Helen. Bill, can you address the electrical project? Are you prepared to walk them through that one?
I can. How much do you? So the original agenda item dealt with going through the CIP. We're past time, so we don't have to necessarily go through that today. I just want to make sure I understand what you want me to cover. I definitely can talk about the electrical projects.
I think timing and risk associated with deferring it is the question we're seeking to provide more information to the board about.
Right. So first of all, you're saying that the switch gears at the pump station have not been replaced for almost 25 years. Right. And the economic life or the duty cycle life of those switch gears, how long?
Yeah, mechanical equipment usually is 20 years. I'm less knowledgeable about the electrical side of it. So my guess, it's not much more than that.
Okay. And
certainly
then,
code has changed since then.
Right.
So Erica, if you don't mind, let me just add a couple of thoughts here. You're correct. For those looking at your board materials, you navigate to page 44 of 98 of your PDF file. That's where the more details of this project are located. Yes, the switch gears needs an upgrade. They're functional now. Tests that we make every year regarding their functionality and their operation suggests that they don't need to be replaced immediately. So I'm comfortable, given the information I have now, that we can delay this project. And whether we delay it for 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, I'd like to talk to our operations staff and get a better sense on their comfort level. So with that, there's of course, you're rolling the dice a little bit in if there's an emergency repair isn't needed. As I say, that a current test suggests that that's not the case. If the test should indicate we're at the very last end, kind of like looking at your car tires and your tread is basically down, your tires are basically bald, you want to replace them. That's not the case for this electrical equipment. But let me have a chance to talk with our ops staff to give you a little better sense on how quickly we want to replace these. But I am comfortable delaying them at least a year, so we give them some, give you all some wiggle room with your budget for the next year, and possibly we can defer this maybe into when the urban district has started up. So I can circle back to you by May for that.
Okay, so that'll be great. And one of the things that we would like is technologically, if there's any advancement on the scene that would make the pumps that much more effective. I mean, they're both DC pumps or AC pumps.
Yeah, I'm a stormwater guy, so I don't know. So, but I will. So I'm glad you asked that question. I guess I can I can compensate you later for that, because it moves on to what I was hoping to put in here. The reason why we even have any revenue from for this project is because I advocated that we needed to install some variable speed drives at this pump station. So as Val and other and Kathy probably remember, the original cost of this pump station was X, and now it's increased by Y. And that increase was part due to be adding this new technology, because this pump station is going to get a workout with the new Amazon sites discharging water in there. So I wanted them to help us prepare this pump station for that the additional work. So my intent is to strongly consider adding that technology.
Okay, and so this is where I want you to be with that, because once the variable speed pumps go into effect, we get much more effective pumping for the dollars of capital that we have invested, and our operating expenses less, right? Because you don't have that square frame for demand or load on the system. So completely in agreement with you there. Let's give you some time to think about this in terms of the effect. But what it would do, sort of my envelope, back of the envelope sense, is we'd have about an additional 223,000 associated with that would be in unrestricted balances over and above the additional money that we got from the state of Oregon. So what Kathy, quite honestly, what you're going to see in our May budget is going to be very different, and we'll have something that shows you clearly what our beginning point was, and then where we are today, and then where those funds will be spent in the future, so that we get to that fundamental cash flow question that you raised, and we'll be able to handle that. So with that, what I would do is the following: is just thank everybody for their time. We are well over it. Bill, you will have all the time that you need to go through the CIP at a future meeting. But I think that at this point, it's really up to us just to say, is there a call for an adjournment? And if so, getting a nod from Val, so I would call us adjourned.
Thank you for your time today, board members. Appreciate you.
And we will, Lori, I'll be in touch with you offline so that we can go through some of the ways that we can get to Kathy's question and without burdening the staff. Okay. Excellent.
Thank you all
Thanks,
very
guys.
much.
All right. Bye-bye now.